Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the Mystics on a Mission show. I am your host, Hannah Beer, and I am here today with Ronna Detrick. Hi, Ronna.
Hi.
So good to have you on the show. So
Thanks.
I found Ronna accidentally, somehow, on the internet just recently, and I got chills reading about what's on her website. So she's a speaker, writer, storyteller, and sacred conversationalist, and I thought it was really interesting to talk to somebody who's an expert on sacred writing and women's stories and how they've been interpreted and told, and just the history of feminine stories. And so I'm really excited to have you here, Ronna, to talk to us about all that.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. Excited myself. Thanks for asking. Yeah.
Awesome. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the work that you do, and just tell us, what are you devoted to creating in the world?
I wish there was a simple answer to that question. Of course, it continues to change and evolve throughout my lifetime, as it should. I think that's just, we always are creating, and how we name that and what that looks like in its manifested form continues to shift. But at a very specific level, currently, I run an online business and have now for just over 8 years. And so in the context of that, I write and blog, and then I have clients that I work with really consistently. And then I have products that I offer. And all of this kind of swirls around this larger idea of just the power of women's stories. And so I work with I work with one subset of those. My background is growing up in the church and then going to seminary and being married to a pastor and all kinds of organized religion sort of world that I have left in bits and pieces over my lifetime. And in the midst of that, not quite willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and seeing stories of women within the sacred text that are easily forgotten and overlooked or misinterpreted or not seen through a woman's lens and perspective. And that just kind of pisses me off and makes me sad and all of those things. So a lot of the work that I've done has been to look at those stories and then to say, well, gosh, if I can retell those stories or see them in a different way, then I could do the same with my own. And that feels really important, that I look at the way that I traditionally tell my own story and wonder if maybe there's another way that ought to be considered or could be looked at. And if that's true for me, then it's true for other women as well. And so the conversations that I have with my clients is often around trying to understand the way that we always tell our story and moving into one that feels more expansive, more generative, more wise, deeper, more transformational, all those kinds of things. So I do that with clients. I do that. There's just lots of different ways that I invite that, but it is all around the power of women's stories when told in really redeemed and transformative ways. So I hope that's helpful.
Awesome. So was there a turning point or some kind of cataclysmic point in your life where you felt like, this is my dharma, this is what I'm passionate about, we need to talk about this?
Yeah, it was probably a perfect storm, an accumulation of a number of things. Certainly while I was in my graduate program, I didn't start graduate school till I was almost 41. And in the mix of that, I started recognizing that the way in which women were coming to the stories was radically different than the way that men were coming to the stories. And that began to create a little bit of curiosity in me, and I began doing some writing while I was still in graduate school, working with some of these texts in more feminist friendly ways. Then simultaneous to that, I was, and again, this wasn't all at the same time, it was, this larger window. I ended up divorcing my husband, who was the pastor, which moved me out of the church. And then about 2 years later, I was laid off from my job. And so then in that place, I'm like, okay, I need to make money. How will I do this? And so it was out of all of those things that this began to form. And it probably took me some time, truth be told, to really recognize just how passionate I was about these stories. Like, I didn't pick up on that right away. And so I think it was just through the constant writing and through probably other people's reflection back to me of when I would get up on my soapbox and what the things were that I just kind of kept harping on, that I then began to realize, oh, this does really matter to me. Does it matter to anybody else? And my belief for a very long time was, no, it only matters to me. Nobody cares about this. No one's going to pay for this. This is completely irrelevant to the larger world. Until I finally was able to, I still wrestle with that, to be sure, but I think there's more of me now that says, no, this does actually matter. The way we tell women's stories, even if they're not stories in our own tradition, makes a huge difference. And I'm really committed to this. Like I beat this drum all the time. Like, it really matters how we tell these stories, and it really matters that we not forget them and not lose sight of historical tellings that have actually harmed us, because those same patterns perpetuate themselves in our own lives and in our larger world. And I am not okay with that. So, no cataclysmic events, maybe 3 or 4 cataclysmic events that all kind of converged together and helped me see myself a little bit more clearly. So,
that's so cool.
Mm.
I also wonder, is there one biblical story or just a story of a woman that you feel has been misinterpreted and distorted for so long and that you feel especially passionate about, telling in a different way?
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel that way about all of them. There are 52 of them currently that I work with pretty consistently, but I think the easiest and the clearest one to always go to is the story of Eve, because it's a story that everybody knows, whether they've grown up in the context of organized religion or Western Christianity or any of those things. We all know that mythic tale. And so, the predominant telling is that Adam and Eve are in the garden. They're told that there's, a tree that they're not allowed to eat from. Eve has a conversation with a serpent. The serpent says, why wouldn't you eat it? She takes a bite. Adam then has a bite, and then, all hell breaks loose and they're cast out of the garden. Okay, that's the common telling. And I'm not even arguing so much with the telling as much as I am how we've interpreted the telling. So we've seen that story as one in which Eve's unwillingness to follow the rules is a problem. Eve's pursuit of her own desire and actually tasting what it is that she longs for is hugely problematic. And if I extrapolate this out, it sounds in our society, but also within us, like, my desire is just going to get me into trouble. I dare not open Pandora's box. I better not step that direction because, all hell's going to break loose. And women historically, as a group, as well as individually, feel this burden of, I'm too dangerous. If I really step into who I am, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. And I can't do that. And we have, hundreds, if not thousands of years of history of actually seeing that as true. Women are dangerous. And so either the culture says you're too much, knock it off, and here's how we're going to repress you. And, or we've learned to do that just intrinsically. Like, we just know we're too much. I need to play small. I need to be quieter. I need to not ruffle anybody's feathers. I need to figure out what's going on around me first before I ever step into any place with courage or strength or volume. And I think it's not completely this, but I look at it and go, that's all because of the way we've told Eve's story. If we would tell it a different way, if we had told it a different way hundreds of years ago, we would be in a completely different place today. In fact, I was just ranting about something shortly after the election. And I said, honestly, if we had started telling Eve's story differently a few hundred years ago when modernism began and all kinds of things, all cataclysmic events occurred in history as it relates to religion, Donald Trump would have never been elected president. To me, it's so clear that those two things are connected. Are there lots of other forces and things that have been occurring throughout time? Of course. But that story has turned the tide of how we understand women in our culture and how we understand ourselves. And I just don't think that's okay. So what I end up doing is saying, let's tell the story totally differently. It's just a story. So what if instead I say that Eve's desire was the part of her that was the closest and most reflective of the divine? What if that was always the way the story was supposed to go, that they're supposed to leave the garden, that they were supposed to step out into a new, huge world? Then we get to see a woman's desire and what that looks like in her life in a completely different way, because we say, yay, you're doing what you should do, instead of stop it, too much, too dangerous, go back. So I can go on and on about this, but it's one example, but I can do that with any of the stories. I can, the built-in beliefs that have been connected to the way that those stories have been told is really painful when we start to look at it. And so I want those unraveled so that we can see that within ourselves and start telling and living a different one.
Wow, this is so interesting. So I feel like I grew up with zero Christianity in my life. I grew up in Germany, and when you go to a German elementary school, you have to attend some kind of, either Catholic or Protestant class about religion. And I remember having, a D, never doing my homework and all other, that was the only subject where I really was, not doing well. And in all others, I had straight A's, but I did not understand what that was even about. So I feel like I grew up pretty sheltered from it. And now I'm so interested in the Bible, and I'm so interested in Christianity and in all those stories. And it's really cool because I come to this whole Christianity thing and to those sacred texts with a pretty fresh perspective. And something that I keep thinking is, why does history start with Jesus? What about everything that came before? And, I need more information about Mary Magdalene. Where can I find this? And, just because of the fact that I live in 2017, I'm able to read other channel texts, like the Nag Hammadi text, to just supplement the Bible, which also is just a really old book. It has been translated and edited for so many times. I mean, of course, there's going to be some, if you translate something over and over and over again, there have to be some discrepancies, and I'm totally able to accept that and stuff. And so I really came to this whole sacred story situation with such a fresh perspective, and it's really interesting to see how we just don't know a lot. Sometimes I talk to my friends and I tell them about all those other texts that exist next to the Bible, or the just other sacred texts that I love to read, and that are so, it just feels like we don't have all the information. And oftentimes we stop looking for the rest of the story. It's I love the book Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, where Jesus's grandmother explains Jesus's life from her perspective, and we get so much more information about the mystery schools he's attended, his travels to Britain, to Gaul, to Egypt. And I didn't know any of that after reading the Bible. So I'm really grateful for all of these additional sacred texts. And this search and this research has really also made me curious, why do I have this strong resistance to sharing my voice? I just feel it in my belly. And every single client who comes to me, they always feel like they need somebody to tell them that it's okay to create it, that it's okay to stand on stage, that it's okay to speak up, that it's okay to feel what they're feeling. And I was also wondering, why? And it makes so much sense, because the words that we use to describe our life experience and to describe our history matter so much. And we always want to stay in tribe with our people. We don't, if it has always been done one way for thousands of years, we don't want to, break that. Because we as humans need to stay in tribe. We need to know that we're just like everybody else, that we're unique, but also just like everybody else. And if we don't belong, that triggers deep, deep fear in us. So I just love hearing about all this from you. It's really interesting. Yeah, I wonder, how do you feel about those other sacred texts?
Mm.
Are there any stories or books that you recommend or anything that you found where you say, hell yeah, that's awesome.
Mm.
Everybody should read this. Everybody should know about this. Like, that's a better way to tell feminine stories.
Mm-hmm. You know, first, let me say, I love that you come at this with this perspective, because I do talk to people like you every once in a while. I come across people who aren't inundated or like subsumed in expected beliefs. And oftentimes we don't even know we have the beliefs because we've just grown up in Western culture. We didn't ever go to church, but it's in the water, right? And a lot of times we're just not aware of that. So I love hearing that you have a sense of the perspective that you bring, which is fresh and unbiased in some ways, and yet recognizing at the same time that there is bias. There is like this inbred, built-in belief that you're curious about and wondering, like, where does that come from and why would I have that? And I just think those are such important questions for us to always be answering. As it relates to other texts, I grew up in a world where those were very suspect and like not okay. Like the Bible's the only text that we're going to put any credibility in. And so the process for me of being exposed to other stories and other storytellers and other perspectives, even on the stories that I knew, was early on, like this would have been when I was much younger, very discombobulating for me. And later, like, oh, that's awesome. Like, why didn't anybody tell me that? Why had I never heard it this way? Why are we not talking about this in church or in spiritual sacred conversation? And so I've read lots of these books, right? I've read the texts, the Gospel of Mary, all of these different things that are available out there. And I try to hold them about as loosely as I try to hold scripture itself, right? It's another way in which we're telling the story of humanity, where we're trying to make sense of the world that we live in. And is it the only viewpoint? Is it even accurate? Do I even care? No. It's just another lens, all of which is super helpful. At a really personal level, I think that the texts that I love reading sometimes the most is Jewish midrash. So in the Jewish faith, the rabbis from beginning of time get together and they argue basically about the text. And they all come and they say, well, I think it means this, and I think it means this, and I think it means this. And they have no need to resolve it. They have no need to come up with the one interpretation that's correct. Midrash is this sort of argument and discussion. And so you can find midrash that's been done, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, where the rabbis were wrestling with things that in mainline Christianity, we resolved and came up with one answer. And we think it's the right answer. And then you go back and read the midrash and say, oh my gosh, they were arguing about all the things that I wonder about, but that I was told weren't allowed to be considered. So I love Jewish midrash, and I particularly love contemporary Jewish midrash that's being written by women rabbis that are looking at the text from a feminist lens and a Jewish lens, which means they wouldn't be looking at the story of Jesus or forward, because the Jewish people would be looking at the Old Testament. Oh my gosh, the work that those female rabbis are doing around women's stories in the Old Testament is breathtaking. I just can't get enough of it. I love finding other women who are saying what I'm saying so that I'm with my tribe, right? I'm like, exactly, that's what I'm saying. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm really curious to learn more about this. It's the first time I ever heard about Jewish midrash.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Beautiful tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess in a more generalized way, I would say what I'm always really interested in when I read something is not a search for truth. Like, I'm not trying to find an answer or a way to understand or interpret or tell a story. What I'm interested in is, when I read that, where do I feel resistance? When I read that, where do I kind of show up in a different way and go, well, that like deconstructs about 6,000 things, if that is possible. And watching just kind of my own experience of that is what I'm way more interested in than the story itself, because my experience of it is where the work or where the invitation is for change, right? If I don't like it, well, why? What's that about? Why? Or if I love this, why? What is it speaking to? What nerve is it hitting? What is it bringing forth that has been unexpressed for me in some way? And now what's the path I can walk down in exploring that more within my own story?
I love that. I notice that with myself too sometimes, that I just try to read the book Bringers of the Dawn about the Pleiadians. Have you heard of this book?
Mm-mm.
It's basically about aliens,
Mm.
and it is a spiritual text, but it is about aliens.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really trying to stay open, and it's been difficult for me. And I notice that it is difficult because many of the things that are written in there directly contradict what I hold God to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I take baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
And I take baby steps, and it was
Mm-hmm.
freaking me out, and it was really, really good for me to feel it inside of myself, this resistance to that's not true. This person who wrote it is like a traitor. This person doesn't know what she's talking about. This is not okay. God is different. And I had this voice inside of myself as well, because I might not have grown up with Christianity, but I have been having an intimate connection with God and the angels for many years. And if something contradicts my worldview, the sirens go off inside my head.
Absolutely.
And what I love about what you just said is that it's about the experience. It's like, what is it bringing up for you? How are you interpreting it?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean for you? Why does this sting? Like, why don't you want to read this? Why aren't you open to this different perspective?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I love the flexibility of it. I love the humility of saying, I'll just check it out. I'll just be curious about this. I'll just see what this story might be able to teach me, or how it might look from this perspective, and to allow different perspectives to also be, part of it, to just allow that. I think that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So a big part of your work is sacred writing. What is sacred writing?
So it's actually a lot of what we're just talking about, only I would probably just package it up a little bit differently, right? Like the example that you're using of reading something that the sirens go off, that happens. Let me say that. How do I want to say this? If you and I were doing this together, right? If we were doing sacred writing together, and you were reading this book and it's causing all these sirens to go off, all right? And you chose to journal about that, or write a blog post about that, or just sit down and kind of try to figure out what it is that you're thinking and articulating. Gosh, this makes me crazy when I read this, or I completely resist this, or I think this is totally wrong and this person's a total traitor. And you just write, whatever it is, doesn't make any difference. Then the process between you and me would be that you would let me see that. You would send that to me. And then I get to look at it just as we're talking about it. I get to bring a different perspective and a different lens, and I get to be curious about the places that I can hear your resistance, or your fear, or your desire, or your longing. And the reality is, for all of us, I am certainly not immune to this. I can't see myself completely, right? I need other people in my life. I need other stories. I need friends. I need other women. I need guidance. I need support. I really long for other people's seeing of me, so that I can see myself with more clarity. And so what I'm trying to offer in sacred writing is that, like, will you let me see you? And it's safe. I know it's scary. I totally get it, but it isn't. It's not scary. Like, will you let yourself be seen? And will you be curious about what I might see and where I might invite you to go based on what you've written? Which could be anything, right? Like, that's part of the process. We can choose anything that you've written or that you want to write, or I'm happy to give you a prompt, like whatever. Because my belief is that when we write, something different is happening in our brain when we're writing versus talking. And things begin to reveal themselves that we might not realize is or are. And I want to be able to witness those. And then I send it back to you. And I say, here's all the things that I'm seeing. Here's what I'd love for you to write about next. Here are my questions. This is what I wonder. Is there some story there? Here's what here's the rabbit trail you might follow next. And you'll write again. And we almost are in conversation, but in written form, so that I can help you see yourself and witness your heart and your desires. Anyway, it's a back and forth in that regard, based ultimately on my deep belief that women hold such wisdom within. How do we get it? How do we get at it? How do we find it? How do we hear it? How do we bring it forth? How do we learn to trust it? And one of the ways that happens is when we're witnessed. We need to be witnessed. And that's a really scary thing for us to do sometimes in a public facing way. And so I think, all right, well, let's just do that, you and me. Let me see you, let me hear you, and let me be kind and generous and offer you what I am witnessing. And then in this sacred back and forth, what else might that invite? So that's what it is.
Beautiful. I'm also curious about your own writing practice. Can you tell us a little bit about how you write?
Sure. So I have at least two kind of forms that I'm using. And one is just my personal writing. It's just journaling that I do almost every day by hand in a 3-ring notebook with college ruled paper and a certain pen that I like. And it's nothing, even this morning when I was doing this, I was writing, I've sat here for at least 2 minutes and my pen has not moved and I have nothing to say except that I'm writing, that I've sat here for 2 minutes and my pen is not moving and I have nothing to say, right? Like I'm writing the thing that I'm not doing, which means that I'm actually doing something. So sometimes it's as simple and almost silly as that. And other times I'm writing about something that I experienced yesterday or some conversation that I had with my daughter, or something that I want to talk to my therapist about, or I'm really sad, or I'm hurt, or I'm afraid. And so I just write, not very long, maybe 15, 20 minutes. It's not a long process by any stretch. And as I write, what I usually see is 1 or 2 sentences that will show up that I didn't expect if I just let myself keep going. And I'll look at that and I'll go, wow, I just wrote that sentence. And then my critic steps in and says, well, that's not what you meant. What you really meant was this. Well, you don't need to look at that. That was just like words on the page. But what I know is that the words came out of my head and I wrote them down. So sometimes it's like super self-critical, right? Like, I'm so stupid. I can't believe that I did this, that, the other thing. And I write it down. And then I'm like, wow, really? Really? So it exposes, my personal writing exposes these deeply embedded beliefs that I don't actually realize I have. And when I can see them, then I make a little asterisk over on the margin. And then tomorrow I'll go back to the asterisk and I'll go, all right, let's write about that for 15 or 20 minutes. What was that about? Why did that show up? So it's just this ongoing practice and process for me of being able to see myself with more clarity, being able to kind of drop underneath the chatter and to get to some things that really I deserve to see them in myself, and I want to work with them. The second form of writing that I do would be my writing for external purposes, right? For my blog or in any other context. I want those two to be combined as much as possible. Like, I really want my external writing to be reflective of my questions, my struggles, my desires, my hopes. And of course it turns, right? It takes a shift when I write for publication, when I write external. And I'm aware of that. The language changes, the voice changes, but it's still me. And I think over the years, because I've been doing this as long as I have, I've learned how to, and it's ongoing, like I'm still learning, but I've learned how to be able to write for print or for consumption without losing the part that's really me wanting to continue to express myself. And I can feel when I'm writing a blog post, for example, when it's now turned into something that just sounds like what I should say. I'm like, that's not what I want. I want to be writing something that actually is coming from my heart, from deeper wisdom. And the editor shows up, the inner critic shows up, the imposter shows up, all those things show up, which for me is just more reason to go back to my personal writing. Okay, there's the imposter complex, as I was talking to Tanya about last week. Okay, there's the inner critic. Fine, let's there's more of that wants to be worked with. All right, here we go, back to the page. So those two dovetail for me a lot of times, and I'm super grateful for that. And if I never wrote another blog post, that would be fine, because the writing that I get to do that feeds my soul continues to feed my soul, and feels important to me.
What especially resonates with me was what you said about needing to go beneath the chatter. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like, so when I used to write more back in the day, maybe a year ago, I loved writing for magazines and publications. And I remember sitting down at my desk and saying, okay, let's write this thing. And guess what? Nothing happened. Yeah. And then I start writing, and it was song lyrics in my head over and over and over again. And I thought, well, how do I get there? There's juice here of stuff to say. I can do this, but it just won't let me. There was so much chatter in my head. And so I've kind of reduced my entire writing practice to simply writing down the thoughts that are in my head as they come up. Absolutely. And sometimes this means writing down song lyrics, writing down my grocery shopping list, writing down what I thought about in the shower, writing just everything down. Because I feel like oftentimes it's like this creative constipation, like there's all this stuff that's just blocking the deeper wisdom. And you also mentioned earlier that you're passionate about helping women access that inner wisdom and access that deeper part of themselves and putting it out on paper so that they can see themselves in a more realistic way. Because I feel like oftentimes, well, at least I can only speak for myself, but I oftentimes just stay so much on the surface because I never actually take the time to release it in some way. And one of my favorite ways personally is to simply write it down until I'm empty, and then burning the paper. From there on out, like there's a clean slate, and I know there's always more coming, so I don't have to worry about, throwing away the good stuff. It's Absolutely. Just a way of curating and editing. And I just love that. And I would love to hear it. Like, do you have any tips around that? Does that happen to everybody? What do you feel?
Yeah, I think that you're right. Our minds are so busy with so much, and the critic and the voice of judgment and all that stuff is in our heads. And what we want, right, is to drop down to this place that is kind of still waters run deep, right? We want to get to this place where we can hear something or feel something that is more grounded and more true and quieter in a really powerful way. And so one of the ways we do that is to just get the other stuff out of the way. And I can get really frustrated with that at times where I feel like all I'm doing is writing down chatter, right? And I can write out, this super frustrates me that all I'm writing down is stupid ass things that don't make any difference. Like, I'm actually writing how I feel about what I'm writing while I'm writing, right? It's this circular process. And when I begin to express, now I'm frustrated. Now I'm irritated. Then I start a new paragraph. I'm frustrated because, and I'll write down all the reasons that I'm frustrated. And then I'll see things in there where I can now go to the next paragraph. Oh, the reason I'm frustrated is because I'm thinking a whole bunch of things that really are keeping my mind super busy, so I don't have to actually acknowledge that I'm sad. Oh, I'm sad. Okay. So now what if my prompt for the next 5 days, and I do this with my clients a lot of times, like just across the top of the page, I want you to just write, I am sad because, or I am afraid of, or I desire, or I wish. and just let yourself write whatever. And the problem is that the second that we see ourselves write out, I wish my significant other didn't piss me off, then we hear the critic rush in and go, well, yeah, but you've got to cut him or her some slack because you know that, blah, blah, right? It all starts up again. And what I want to be able to do with my clients and for myself is to say, no, I actually am really disappointed. Why am I disappointed? Well, because my expectations weren't met, because my heart got hurt. Well, why did it hurt my heart? Do I have other stories where I've been hurt or disappointed before? Yeah, I do. Ugh, I don't want to tell those. Those are old. Haven't I worked with those already? Haven't I put those all away? No, they're all still sitting there, right? And so for me, these are the kinds of questions that I want to be asking my clients, but I also want to be asking myself, like, will I allow myself on the page permission to feel what I feel? Nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to say anything about it. Nobody's going to edit it, unless, of course, you send it to me and you let me work on this with you. But in a general sense, it's just yours. So what if you weren't afraid to really express what you really feel, even if it seems petty and small or excruciating and dark? Go for it. It's all allowed. And the more of it that you can express and see and invite into the light, the more kindness and grace you can offer yourself. I hope that's what I would want.
What I especially love about this is that it almost seems like it's a writing practice where you invite the great mother archetype in, because so many of us, I feel like every single one of us basically has this part in ourselves where we feel like we weren't heard. We feel like we wanted to express something and we just weren't able to. We were told that we're too loud, we're too bossy, we're too whatever, what we say is wrong, what we say is right, so we think it always has to be right. And it's so wonderful when we can write something down and then there's this voice in our heads that says, tell me more. You know, I'll give you the space of 10, 15 minutes. Tell me about it. I'm going to listen.
Another way to get at this that I often use for myself, to be sure, is to write to myself from another voice. So I do this with the stories that I work with, right? Like I'll say, what do I think Eve would say about my current dilemma? What do I think Hannah, the biblical story of Hannah, would say to me, given what I know about her and her grief and her loss and her hope and her desire? Like, what do I think she would say to me? But I've also said to people who don't know the stories the way I do, like, if you were to go sit outside right now, like, what do you think that tree wants you to hear? Or if you're totally stuck with your writing and you need to write something, and like you said, right, I sit there and go, okay, let's do this, and then nothing comes. Then I say to people, what does the keyboard want you to know? What does the blank piece of paper want you to hear? And write it as though, dear Ronna, here's what I wish you knew. Every single time your fingers hit that keyboard, I know that there's a part of you that is being expressed, and I know there's a part of you that's holding back, and I really want for you to be able to say more, and I want you to know, like write that out. Imagine another voice that speaks to you. And then I mean, this is what I do with clients, but over time, what I've learned in that practice for me is, wow, that was my voice speaking to me. Like I got at it by imagining it from another place, but oh, that came from me. That's my wisdom. But I couldn't access it. I couldn't hear it when it's my brain. I have to use my imagination. I have to use my creativity. I have to give myself permission to get at this in some other ways. And it's really powerful when we can see our own wisdom show up. It just sometimes takes some help and some aids and some processes for us to get at it.
That's beautiful. Wow. Awesome. So we're getting to the end of our conversation. I would like to just ask you a couple of personal questions. Like,
Sure.
What's your favorite book right now?
I am completely enraptured by anything that Rebecca Solnit has written. So she has a trilogy. The first one is called Hope in the Dark. The second one is called something like Men Talk to Me or something like that. And the third one is called The Mother of All Questions. And I read the third one first, not realizing that there were two previous to it. And she is a powerful writer, powerful feminist, social commentary, social critique. She articulates things for me around social and political, gender, feminism realities that I know, but I don't think about quite as technically and well as she does. And so I read them, I'm like, I know that. That's exactly right. I just say it in a different way. So it's very validating for me to read her writing and to be reminded that I know more than I think I do, and that I'm actually right about what I think. Like I'll read it and I'll go, that's what I say, but in a different way. I must be right. If Rebecca Solnit says it, it must be true. So those are currently the books that I'm reading. But I also love memoir. Like I can hardly get enough memoir. I read a lot of it, both men and women, but mostly women.
Awesome. What are you most passionate about in your work right now?
Well, certainly sacred writing, because it's my newest offering and I just absolutely love it. And I would say, if I just kind of pan out a little bit, what I'm most passionate about is any context in which I can invite you to begin to see just how powerful and beautiful your story is. And for me, that is the sacred, right? When we can encounter and experience ourselves in ways that feel whole and strong and beautiful and passionate, I think, wow, there's the divine showing up all over the place. So can I help you find that? Can I help you see that? Can I remind you again and again and again just how powerful you are and your story is? I'm all about that. Any way I can do that, that's what I would want to be able to do.
Awesome. What's a dream you want to realize?
I hate to say this out loud, though I have before, so I will anyway. I would really love to actually compel myself to get a book. The book, I think I probably have 2 or 3 of them in me, but there's one that really needs to come out first. That is my retelling of these women's stories and imagining their voices on our behalf. And I just have a lot of stuff that still sits within me in terms of inner critic and resistance and fear and all kinds of things. But I deeply long to be able to complete that and to put that out into the world, and then to be able to move to whatever is next, which I can't seem to get to because this one keeps calling to me. So that would be a dream, to be sure to get that completed.
Awesome. Who is somebody you admire, dead or alive?
Wow. Well, one answer would be that I deeply admire the stories of the women that I get to work with, because I think that they've been unheard and unseen, and they're amazing. And I admire the fact that over centuries of time, they somehow have endured, that the spirit and the thread that connects us together as women has somehow survived, despite their stories being misunderstood, mistold, completely ignored, harmed, violated, all of that. So I really admire that aspect of those stories, but I think that's true about women in general. I also would say that I really admire my daughters. They're amazing. My youngest is 18, and she's just so brave and so beautiful. And my oldest is 20, and she is as well. They're just so different from each other, and they're so incredible. And I have no idea how they've turned out the way that they are. And I just am astonished by them all the time. And I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to just watch them be amazing young women. And it just feels like total miracle to me. I'm constantly amazed by them. So, yeah.
Beautiful. What's your favorite quote?
Muriel Rukeyser. What would happen if one woman told the truth about her life? The world would split open.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom. If people want to stay in touch with you and learn more about sacred writing, and you also have an app, can you tell us about your offerings and how we can stay in touch with you?
Sure, you can just go straight to my website. Everything is there. So it's just ronnadetrick.com, RonnaDetrick. So yeah, there's lots of free stuff, that you can get. The app you can download, and weekly emails that I send out, and the imagined voice of these women, and certainly my blog posts. And then I do readings, which are kind of like a tarot thing with these women's stories, and then sacred writing and sacred conversations, my client work. So lots of things on there that you can take advantage of.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ronna.
Oh, thank you.
Everybody else, head on over to hannahbeer.com/show to get the show notes. Don't forget to let us know how you felt about this episode, and talk to you next week.